now will call on our first witness, and Mr. Austin Scott from Georgia. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Black, and that has a nice ring to it, I might add. And, Ranking Member Van Hollen, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the fiscal year 2012 budget. As president of the 87-strong Republican freshman class, President Obama's fiscal year 2012 budget reminded me of the wisdom of the late cowboy and comedian Will Rogers. He once quipped, government programs have a beginning, a middle, and no end. I usually would find that funny except for the fact that it's frighteningly true. Our debt is a threat to our national security. Senator Obama recognized this. Senator Obama recognized this. On October 1st of 2008, and I'll quote then Senator Obama, "We cannot mortgage our children's future on a mountain of debt. It is time to put an end to the runaway spending and the record deficits. It's not how you would run your family budget, and it must not be how Washington handles your tax dollars." Yet on February the 14th of 2011, the President submitted his budget request to Congress, which proposed $1.6 trillion in deficit spending. As the father of an 11-year-old son, I couldn't agree more with what Senator Obama said when he talked about the threat of our national debt to our security. We need to be a Congress that supports personal freedoms, individual liberties, and economic opportunities for all Americans. My freshman classmates and I are outraged that wasteful, duplicative, and ineffective government spending is so out of control. My constituents in the 8th District of Georgia, like many of yours, would be outraged to know that their scarce tax dollars are used to fund examples like the National Science Foundation provided more than $200,000 to study why political candidates make vague statements. The Department of Veterans Affairs spends $175 million every year to maintain hundreds of buildings it does not use, including a pink octagonal monkey house in Dayton, Ohio. Medicare paid out over $35 million to a vast network of 118 phantom medical clinics, allegedly established by members of a criminal gang to submit phony reimbursement claims. The Internal Revenue Service paid out $112 million in undeserved tax refunds to prisoners who filed fraudulent returns, according to the Treasury Department's Inspector General for Tax Administration. The National Institute of Health spent nearly $442 million to study the number of male prostitutes in Vietnam and their social settings. A $700,000 federal grant paid for researchers to examine greenhouse gas emissions from organic dairies, which are caused by cow burps, among other things. These are just some of the many examples that can be found in Senator Tom Coburn's 2010 Waste Book, which was released December 20th of 2010. As you can guess, there are countless more. They illustrate very well the mindset and guides that guides spending in Washington with the bureaucracy that has been created here. To quote Ronald Reagan, I would venture as far as to say that our government spends money like drunken sailors, but that would insult the sailors because at least they spend their own money. It was exactly this mindset that the other 86 Republican freshmen and I were sent here to reverse. My freshman colleagues and I were sent here to turn Washington's culture of spending on its head. We've started down the right road by proposing to cut $100 billion in the continuing resolution. Now we have to continue with a responsible budget that puts us on the road to fiscal responsibility. I appreciate this committee's recognition of this problem and willingness to have a serious consideration about it. Please do your due diligence to get our runaway spending out of control. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before this distinguished committee today. I look forward to working with you to address the issues.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Do any of the members have questions for the witness? Mr. Woodall, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I'd just be remiss if I didn't welcome my friend from Georgia and my president of my class here. Tell me this, Mr. Scott, when you were back home over those last 10 days, did you feel some coalescing around the kind of what I would call more aggressive budget cutting and balancing that you're trying to bring out in the freshman class?
Absolutely, and Mr. Woodall, what I will tell you is that the amount of fear, absolute fear that I think the United States citizen has right now, whether it's the business owner who's worried about renewing their note to keep their operations going, or the person who works at that business who may be changing the oil at the car dealership. Every American out there has had to adjust their budget down to deal with the realities of this economy, and they expect us to do the same thing, and they are very scared. They are very scared that they don't see the courage or the political will to turn this country and get it back on the right track. And you know, we're out there trying to reassure them that political will is there, and that we are going to get this turned around and back on the right track.
Yeah. Where's the courage? That's a good message. I may quote you on
That's
that.
right.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Mr. Rokita, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Scott. I appreciate your leadership as well. I've been reviewing your testimony here, and I completely agree with your testimony that there is this waste in the federal government, and I appreciate the examples that you've given. I appreciate the examples the Senator's given in his publication. What this committee's been studying, however, is the fact that, and it is a fact, and it's a bipartisan fact, that the drivers of our debt really are the three major social entitlement programs.
Yes, sir.
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Your testimony, unless I'm missing something, doesn't seem to address that in much detail. So to follow up on Mr. Woodall's question, what kind of feedback are you getting in your district from your constituents or from what you hear from other freshmen about the appetite for addressing the drivers of our debt, those three programs? Do your constituents have the courage and the political will to take less largesse now so that our kids don't have a bankrupt country?
Yes, sir. I think absolutely that Americans understand that we must address this problem, these problems, I should say now. I think that they understand the fiscal realities, especially when you put graphs up that show the growth of the national debt. I think that what confuses them, if you will, is the doublespeak of some elected officials. For example, when we have someone who says that we cannot mortgage our children's future, and then they present a budget that has a $1.6 trillion deficit in it. That is where the disconnect is between Washington and back home. I think what they want is absolute transparency with where we are. They want a plan for where we're going. They understand that we're all going to have to give some now so that our children and our grandchildren can again have the benefit of being an American.
And one quick follow-up, if I could. You mentioned the deficit. In this budget that we're working on, do you have an idea what level of deficit in the proposed budget your constituents are willing to live with?
No, sir, I don't. I think, again, that what they expect us to do is to take steps in the right direction. And I think that if we are totally transparent with them and that we start making those steps in the right direction, that we will start to get the economy back on track. And as you know, if we can start getting that economic growth, if we can get 4% economic growth, which is something that, quite honestly, I don't think, and I hold myself accountable for this too, I don't think any of us talk about how do we get to 4% economic growth again. I personally think you get there by more access to capital markets and reducing the regulatory burden on small businesses. But if we can get that 4% economic growth, then the dynamics of the problems that we have shift.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Mr. Yarmouth, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. When I was home over the last weekend, most of my constituents were asking me why in the Republicans' budget, that our continuing resolution, H.R. 1, that we did not share the sacrifice equally among society, that the people who seem to be hit hardest by the proposed cuts in that budget were the most vulnerable population. So, Mr. Scott, you mentioned a few things that you considered wasteful spending, so I'm just going to ask you a couple. Do you consider nutrition assistance for low-income women and their children wasteful spending?
It depends. I will tell you this. I think that the administration of those programs should be handled at the state level. And right now, the biggest problem that I have with what we have, whether it's, you're talking about the WIC program or whether it's the SNAP program, is Washington trying to administer those programs and absolutely prohibiting the states from getting involved in getting rid of the fraud and the waste in some of those
Well, I think we
programs.
could all agree on that, but just in general principles, do you consider spending on those types of programs wasteful, or spending on Pell Grants, or spending on heating assistance for low-income citizens? And do you consider wasteful spending the $4 billion in tax expenditures that we give to oil companies every year?
I'm certainly willing to put all of those issues on the table and take a look at all of them.
Great, thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
I would now like